Pain in an avoidant does not look like pain. That is the first and most important thing to understand about what is happening on the other side of a significant loss. For someone whose entire psychological architecture was built around the management of difficult feeling. The crying, the visible grief, the socially recognizable expression of genuine loss, these are not typically available to someone whose defensive architecture has been routing difficult emotional experience away from full conscious expression since childhood. The pain is present. It is real. It is, in the case of losing someone who was genuinely the right person, significant in ways that exceed what the avoidant has experienced in previous losses. And it does not look like any of the things that pain is supposed to look like from the outside. Understanding how an avoidant shows pain after losing the right person requires holding two things simultaneously: the genuine depth of what is being felt, and the specific characteristic ways that genuine depth finds expression through a psychology that has never developed the ordinary channels for its direct communication. The pain is there, the expression of it is oblique, indirect, often entirely private, and frequently mistaken for something other than what it actually is. The distinction between losing the right person and losing any person matters enormously here, because the avoidant has experienced relational loss before, has ended connections or been in connections that ended and moved through those endings with the specific, practiced, apparently functional quality of someone whose defensive architecture is effective at managing ordinary loss. The management works for ordinary loss, because ordinary loss, for an avoidant, tends to occur in the context of connections that were maintained at the managed distance the defensive architecture requires. The loss of a connection that never reached the depth of genuine attachment is not the same experience as losing someone who got through, who reached the place behind the walls, who the avoidant genuinely attached to at the level below all the management. The right person is the person who reached that place, not necessarily because they tried harder or understood better or were more patient. Sometimes because the specific combination of who they were and who the avoidant was in that specific period created something the defensive architecture could not intercept before genuine attachment formed. However it happened, the genuine attachment was real, and the loss of genuine attachment in an avoidant produces something that the loss of managed connection does not. It produces the specific, significant, management exceeding pain that this conversation is about. The first way an avoidant shows pain after losing the right person is through the specific failure of the self-sufficiency performance. The self-sufficiency performance is the avoidant's primary, most practiced response to relational difficulty. The maintenance of the composed, functioning, apparently unaffected exterior that communicates to everyone watching and to the avoidant themselves that the loss is being managed, that the interior equilibrium is intact, that the self-sufficiency narrative is accurate, and the departure of another person, however genuinely felt, is not producing the kind of distress that the avoidant self-concept insists they do not experience. After losing the right person, this performance fails in specific and observable ways, not dramatically, not through the obvious collapse of someone in visible crisis, in the smaller, more telling ways of someone whose performance is requiring more effort than usual and not fully succeeding despite the effort. The self-sufficiency performance after losing the right person has a slightly worked quality, a quality of being maintained rather than inhabited. The person who is genuinely fine does not need to demonstrate their fineness. The person whose performance of fine is covering something significant does. The demonstration has a specific, slightly overconstructed quality, the social engagement that is marginally too regular, the productivity that is marginally too visible, the forward motion that is marginally too announced, that is distinguishable from genuine equilibrium by anyone paying close enough attention. The people close to the avoidant may notice something is different without being able to name exactly what. The avoidant is still functioning, still showing up, still performing the version of themselves that the self-sufficiency narrative requires. But something in the quality of the performance has changed. The ease is gone, the naturalness is reduced, the slightly effortful quality of someone who is working to maintain something that usually maintains itself is present underneath the surface. This is pain showing through the cracks of the container that was built to hold it. The second way is through the specific characteristic overinvestment in distraction. Avoidants have always used activity and productivity as the channels through which difficult interior experience gets routed, when the direct emotional channel is unavailable. After losing the right person, the pattern intensifies in ways that are recognizable as intensification to anyone who knows the baseline. The projects that multiply. The schedule that fills past ordinary busyness into the specific, slightly frantic quality of someone who is ensuring that no space remains in which the unmanaged feeling could surface. The gym attendance, the work hours, the social commitments, all of the ordinary avoidant distraction channels operating at elevated capacity. Not because life has genuinely become busier, because the interior has become louder and the distraction needs to be louder than the interior in order to maintain the manageable level. The intensity of the distraction is proportional to the intensity of what is being distracted from. An avoidant who has lost someone who did not reach the genuine attachment level does not require this volume of distraction management. The ordinary channels are adequate. The ordinary busyness maintains the comfortable level without extraordinary effort. The extraordinary effort is the evidence. The specific, observable, slightly excessive quality of the distraction is the inverse measure of the pain. The bigger the distraction, the bigger the thing being distracted from. The third way is the one that tends to be most surprising to people around the avoidant and most surprising to the avoidant themselves. It is the specific, uncharacteristic reaching that occurs in the period after the loss. Not necessarily toward the person who was lost, though sometimes that too in the oblique deniable forms that avoidant reaching characteristically takes, but toward other people and other forms of connection with an urgency and frequency that is not the avoidant's ordinary operating mode. The avoidant who ordinarily maintains careful, comfortable distance connections begins, in the aftermath of losing the right person, to reach more, to initiate contact with people they have not been in regular contact with, to show up in their relationships with a slightly more present, slightly more invested quality than their usual mode, to demonstrate, in ways noticeable as departures from the baseline, a need for human connection that the self-sufficiency narrative is usually successful at keeping at a manageable level. This reaching is the attachment system responding to the loss of its significant object by activating the seeking behavior that attachment systems activate in conditions of genuine loss. The avoidance attachment to the right person, genuine, deep, below the management level, has been activated into its full unmanaged scale. And the activated attachment system is doing what attachment systems do. It is seeking proximity. It is orienting toward available connection. It is expressing, in the specific, indirect, avoidant characteristic form of reaching toward whoever is available, the specific, direct need for the specific person who is no longer available. The people on the receiving end of this unusual reach often notice something is different. The avoidant is not quite themselves, more present than usual, and also somehow more fragile underneath the presence. The fourth way is the most private and the least visible from outside. It is the specific quality of the replaying. The avoidance memory of the lost connection does not behave the way their memories of previous relationships behave. Previous relationships ending were filed with reasonable efficiency. The self-sufficiency architecture processed them to the level required for continued functioning and moved on. The memories were present but not active. Past tense in the specific, settled way that processed things achieve past tense. The memories of the right person are not settling into past tense. They are staying active. Staying present tense in a specific, intrusive, involuntary way of something that is still being processed rather than something that has been filed. Appearing in unguarded moments. Surfacing in the honest hours. Arriving in the middle of unrelated activities with the quality of something that has not been adequately contained. The specific memories that surface are often not the dramatic ones. They are the ordinary ones, the particular texture of a specific conversation. The quality of an unremarkable moment that was unremarkable at the time and that is now in its absence demonstrating its significance by the specific weight of its loss. The ordinary memory surfacing with the weight of significant things is itself the evidence of how deeply the connection was encoded. The avoidant who is replaying in this specific, involuntary, not yet past tense way is showing pain in the most honest form available to someone whose channels for direct expression are largely unavailable. The replaying is the pain finding the only fully unguarded moment, the interior of the mind in the honest hours, to be fully what it is. The fifth way is the specific characteristic change in the quality of engagement with the ordinary things that the connection touched. Songs, places, times of day. Specific activities or foods or phrases or any of the ordinary, sensory, entirely unpredictable triggers that the nervous system's encoding of a significant person deposits throughout the landscape of daily life. These things do not produce ordinary nostalgia in an avoidant after losing the right person. They produce the specific, disproportionate, management requiring response of something that has been deeply encoded in countering its trigger. The avoidant who changes the radio station with slightly too much urgency. Who avoids a specific part of the city without being able to explain why. Who responds to a specific time of day with a low-level, difficult to attribute quality of heaviness. Who stops ordering the thing they used to order together without consciously deciding to stop. These changes are small, individually explicable as coincidence. Collectively, they constitute the specific, daily, ongoing evidence of someone navigating a landscape changed at its ordinary level by the loss of someone who was present in enough ordinary moments to have encoded in the texture of daily life. This is pain living in the ordinary. Not in the dramatic moments, but in the texture of Tuesdays, in the small, specific, unremarkable moments where the absence is present in the most mundane and therefore most relentless form. The sixth way is perhaps the most significant, because it has the most potential to produce genuine change if the pain is allowed to do its full work rather than being managed back to a tolerable level. It is the specific, ongoing confrontation with the self-concept that the loss of the right person produces and sustains. The avoidance self-concept has always included the specific, functional narrative of self-sufficiency and comfortable independence. The narrative that said the managed distance was preference rather than fear, that genuine connection was not particularly necessary, that the departure of people, however genuinely felt, was ultimately manageable within the existing framework. The loss of the right person produces a sustained, daily, management-resistant confrontation with this narrative that previous losses did not produce, because the pain is not manageable within the existing framework. The management strategies are working at elevated capacity and producing insufficient relief. The self-sufficiency that was supposed to be adequate is demonstrating in the specific daily living experience of the pain that it is not adequate. This confrontation is the most important thing the pain can produce. If it is allowed to run its full course, rather than being interrupted by the successful reassertion of the management strategies, it reaches something genuine. The honest interior reckoning with what the pattern costs, with what the defensive architecture prevents, with what the loss of the right person has demonstrated about the gap between the self-sufficiency narrative and the actual living, feeling reality of someone who needed this person and is experiencing the significant pain of their genuine absence. That reckoning is the beginning of the only thing that actually changes avoidant patterns, not the intellectual understanding of the psychology, not the therapeutic language acquired without the genuine felt engagement it is supposed to represent. The specific, personal, cannot be managed away confrontation with the full cost of the pattern in the form of the specific, significant, daily experienced pain of losing someone who was genuinely the right person. The right person deserves a clear definition, not the idealized fantasy version of a perfect partner who meets every need effortlessly. The honest, psychological definition of what makes someone the right person specifically for an avoidant in the way that produces this kind of pain. The right person is the person who reached past the defensive architecture before the architecture could intercept the attachment. Who the avoidant attached to at the level below the management strategies. Who exists in the avoidance nervous system, not as a managed, comfortable distance connection, but as a significant attachment figure encoded at the depth that only genuine attachment produces. The right person is also, typically, someone who brought something specific and unusual to the connection. The quality of genuine seeing, the accurate, attentive perception of the avoidant as they actually are, rather than as they present. The quality of honest communication, the real, clear expression of genuine feeling and genuine need. The quality of patient, sustained, genuine presence in the face of patterns that kept making the presence costly. The right person, in other words, is often the person who was doing the things this whole arc of conversations has been describing. Who was present fully and loving genuinely, and communicating honestly, and finally, when the honest communication was consistently not received, choosing themselves with a specific self-directed quality that genuine self-reclamation produces. The pain of losing that person is the pain of the defensive architecture's specific, finally undeniable cost. Of having had access to something real and having the patterns prevent the full, adequate daily reality receiving of it. Of the right person being lost not to circumstances or incompatibility or any neutral force, but to the pattern itself. There is a specific quality of the pain that avoidants experience after losing the right person that distinguishes it from ordinary grief. And it is worth naming directly because it illuminates something important about both the psychology and the genuine depth of what was felt. The pain has a recursive quality. It is not simply the pain of the loss. It is the pain of the loss plus the pain of understanding, at some level of honest interior accounting, why the loss occurred. Most grief does not contain this second layer in the same way. The grief of losing someone to circumstances beyond anyone's control, to death, to distance, to the neutral movements of lives going in different directions, is organized around the loss itself. It does not require the grieving person to sit with the specific, personal, consequential recognition that the loss was produced by their own patterns. Avoidant grief after losing the right person contains this second layer. The loss is present, and the awareness of the pattern's role in producing the loss is present simultaneously. Not always with full conscious clarity, not always in the explicit, articulable form of "I lost this person because of my patterns," but in the specific, felt, below conscious quality of a grief that has a different weight than ordinary grief. That keeps returning to specific moments, not just with the sadness of what is missing, but with the specific, uncomfortable, morally weighted quality of someone encountering their own choices in the honest light of their consequences. This recursive quality of the grief is one of the most important features of what the pain is doing in the avoidance interior, because the recursion is the beginning of accountability. The reaching back to specific moments, not just to mourn them but to examine them. The sitting with the specific painful awareness that the moments contain choices, that the choices had consequences, that the consequences are the loss being grieved. That awareness, however partial and however defended against, is the most honest thing currently running in the avoidance interior. More honest than the self-sufficiency performance. More honest than the overinvestment in distraction. More honest than the reaching toward available connections as the substitute-seeking behavior. The recursive grief, sitting with its own uncomfortable second layer, is where the genuine reckoning lives if the avoidant is willing to let it. The pain also shows itself in the specific way the avoidant relates to the future after losing the right person. In what the future looks like from inside an interior that has lost its significant object and is processing that loss through the specific layered, management-resistant quality of genuine grief. The future that was being implicitly constructed, the background, unannounced, quietly built future that genuine attachment produces without declaring itself, is now absent. The avoidant was not consciously planning a future with the right person. The defensive architecture was always keeping the explicit future planning at a comfortable distance from full commitment. But the implicit future was there. The background assumption of the person's continued presence in the landscape of life. The quiet, unannounced, entirely below the surface future that the nervous system builds around significant attachment figures without permission from the conscious mind. That implicit future is now absent, and its absence has a specific daily quality that is different from the acute pain of the immediate loss. It shows up as the specific flatness of ordinary future-facing thought. Of planning for things, and finding the planning has a quality that did not previously exist, a certain incompleteness, a certain failure of the imagination to generate the image of the future with the same quality it had before. The future still exists. The planning still proceeds, but something is different in the texture of it. Something that the implicit background assumption of the right person's presence was providing, and that its absence has quietly, specifically, in the unglamorous ordinariness of daily future-facing thought, removed. Finally, there is the pain that shows itself in the avoidance relationship with the possibility of new connection. In the specific, uncomfortable, often entirely private recognition that what the right person provided is not automatically available from the next available source. Previous losses, for the avoidant, did not produce this recognition with the same force, because previous connections were maintained at the managed distance that made them, at some functional level, substitutable. The loss of a managed connection can be managed. Another managed connection can provide the same comfortable distance relational experience that the previous one provided. The self-sufficiency architecture processes the loss, manages the adjustment, and the ordinary relational landscape is sufficient for the ordinary relational requirements. The right person was not providing ordinary relational experience at a comfortable managed distance. They were providing something that is not available at a comfortable managed distance. The genuine seeing, the honest communication, the specific quality of being known in the way that only genuine full presence allows. These things are not substitutable because they are not available at the level the avoidance ordinary relational mode operates at. They require the dropping of the management, the lowering of the walls, the specific vulnerability that the right person somehow created the conditions for, and that the defensive architecture is, in the ordinary course of daily relational life, very effectively preventing. The avoidant encounters this in the specific, quiet, often entirely private recognition that the available connections are not providing what the right person was providing. Not because the available people are inadequate, because the available connections are being managed at the comfortable distance. And the comfortable distance prevents access to the specific quality of being genuinely known that the right person somehow provided. This recognition, held honestly, is the most direct possible argument for genuine change. The pain of the loss and the recognition that the loss is specifically of something that is not available elsewhere at the current operating mode, together these constitute the most compelling case that the defensive architecture has ever had to face. The honest, experiential, cannot be managed away case that the pattern is costing something that is genuinely, specifically, irreplaceably significant. Whether the case is heard is still the avoidance choice. The pain is present, the recognition is available, the reckoning is possible. None of it is automatic. None of it produces change without the avoidant's own active, genuine daily practice engagement with the actual work of doing things differently. But the pain is the most honest thing available, the most direct, unmediated, finally real connection to the actual cost of the pattern. The most genuine signal that something genuinely significant was lost, and that the losing of it was not neutral, and that the prevention of the next losing of the next right person requires something different from what has always been done. The pain is the beginning. Whether it becomes anything more depends on what the avoidant chooses to do with the beginning they have been given. The beginning the pain represents is not a guarantee of anything. This is worth saying plainly, because the emotional logic of this conversation can accumulate toward a conclusion that is more certain than the honest psychology supports. The pain is real, the recognition is available, the reckoning is possible. And none of these things automatically produce the change they are pointing toward. The avoidant in genuine pain after losing the right person is at a fork, not a dramatic, announced fork. The quiet, daily, repeated fork of someone whose interior is doing something significant and whose choices about what to do with that something significant will determine whether the pain produces genuine change or whether the pain produces the temporary disruption of the equilibrium that eventually, through the operation of the management strategies, restores to the familiar baseline. Both paths are available. The honest examination of what the pain is producing in the avoidant requires holding both paths clearly rather than assuming the more hopeful one. The path toward genuine change begins with something that is less dramatic than the word change suggests. It begins with the avoidant allowing the pain to be what it is, without immediately deploying the management strategies to reduce it to a tolerable level. This sounds simple. It is genuinely demanding, because the management strategies are not a deliberate choice in the moment of deployment. They are the automatic, below-conscious, deeply grooved responses of a nervous system that has been managing difficult interior experience towards a comfortable level since childhood. They activate before the conscious mind has engaged. They have been running this program for longer and with more repetition than any conscious intention can easily override. Allowing the pain to be what it is, to run at its actual level rather than the managed level, to stay in the interior without the immediate routing through the distraction channels, to be felt with the full weight it carries, requires the specific active ongoing choice to not reach for the management strategies when they automatically offer themselves, to sit with the discomfort rather than take the available exit, to allow the feelings to be present and louder than the management capacity without that loudness being treated as an emergency requiring immediate resolution. This is genuinely difficult. It is not the kind of difficulty that is resolved through intellectual commitment or therapeutic language or the self-aware acknowledgement that allowing the pain to be felt is the right thing to do. It is the specific, bodily, in-the-moment difficulty of a nervous system that has been conditioned to treat this level of emotional experience as something requiring management encountering the choice to not manage it. The difficulty lives in the body before it lives anywhere else. What becomes available when the pain is allowed to run at its actual level, when the management strategies are not immediately deployed to reduce it to tolerable, is the specific, honest, deeply personal content of what the pain is actually about. The pain has content. It is not simply the undifferentiated weight of loss. It contains specific, pointed, individually addressable pieces that the management strategies have been keeping at the level of vague, general, difficult to engage heaviness. When the management is not immediately deployed, the pieces become legible. The specific moments surface. The particular choices become visible. The honest accounting of what was done and what it produced, and what was available and was not taken, has the specific clarity that genuine reckoning requires. The pain, allowed to run at its actual level, shows the avoidant the specific choices. The moment the withdrawal was chosen over the staying, the moment the repair was available and was not made, the moment the honest communication arrived and was managed rather than genuinely received. The moment the right person was present and available, and the defensive architecture was running its program against them rather than alongside them. These moments, surfacing in the honest space of pain, allowed to be what it is, are not comfortable. They have the specific, pointed, morally weighted quality of someone encountering their own choices in the honest light of their actual cost. And the encountering of choices in that light is the beginning of genuine accountability that the intellectual understanding of patterns, however sophisticated, never reaches. There is something that happens in the avoidant who genuinely allows the pain to do its full work. That is worth describing because it is rarely discussed in the available language about avoidant change. It is the specific, quiet, often entirely private experience of grief for themselves. Not grief for the lost person, though that is present. Grief for the version of themselves that the right person saw, and that the defensive architecture keeps from being the daily reality. Grief for the genuine, undefended, fully present version of themselves that was briefly available in the connection, and that has been managed back below the surface. Grief for the specific, extraordinary quality of being fully themselves in genuine connection with another person. The experience the love-bombing phase or the unguarded moments produced, and the ongoing daily architectural separation from that experience that the defensive patterns maintain. This grief for self is one of the more unexpected and more significant things the pain of losing the right person can produce, because it requires the avoidant to acknowledge honestly and personally that the defensive architecture is not simply protecting them from an external threat. It is also separating them from something genuinely valuable that exists within them, the full version of themselves. The undefended, genuinely present, extraordinarily capable version that the right person knew, and that the pattern keeps from being consistently available. The grief for this lost version of self is not self-pity. It is honest mourning for something real, for the genuine, specific, valuable interior life that is present and inaccessible most of the time, for the quality of genuine connection that the full version makes possible and that the managed version consistently prevents. For the specific extraordinary experiences, being genuinely known, being fully present with another person, the specific quality of undefended mutual recognition that the pattern was always costing. The path toward genuine change also requires the avoidant to do something with the specific recognition that the right person's qualities, the seeing, the honesty, the sustained generosity, the patient, genuine investment in something real, were not ordinary, were rare. Were the specific, unusual, genuinely valuable combination of qualities that made the connection significant enough to produce this level of pain in its absence? This recognition matters because it changes the framing of what the change is for. The intellectual framing of avoidant change tends to organize it around the avoidant's own well-being, around the avoidant's capacity for genuine connection as a good for the avoidant. This framing is valid and has its place. The recognition of the right person's specific, unusual, genuinely valuable qualities adds another dimension. The change is also for the possibility of being adequate to someone extraordinary, of being the person who can receive and honor and consistently show up for what someone genuinely remarkable is offering. Of not being the specific, consequential limitation that prevents something extraordinary from being what it could be. This is a different kind of motivation than the motivation of the avoidant's own well-being. It is other-directed rather than self-directed. And for avoidance, whose defensive architecture is precisely organized around self-direction as the protective mode, the other-directed motivation can reach places that the self-directed motivation does not. The desire to have been worthy of the right person, to become the person who could have genuinely met what the right person was offering, is the specific, personal, loses its force if unnamed motivation that the pain of losing the right person uniquely makes available. The practical question of what genuine change actually looks like for an avoidant who has lost the right person and is allowing the pain to do its full work deserves honest, specific, unglamorous description. Because the popular versions of avoidant change tend towards either the dramatic gesture or the therapeutic insight. And genuine change looks like neither of those things. Genuine change looks like the withdrawal impulse activating in the next significant connection and not being followed. Not because the impulse is absent, because the conscious, active daily practice choosing of a different response to the impulse has been practiced enough times to be available in the moment of activation. The impulse to withdraw when closeness reaches a certain depth will still be present. It is deeply grooved. It does not vanish because the pain of the previous loss was significant enough to produce the decision to change. It diminishes with the repetition of the different choice, over time in the specific moments of activation. Genuine change looks like the repair being made earlier, before the distance has grown too large, before the other person has had to absorb the full weight of the unrepaired rupture. At the specific, slightly uncomfortable moment when the repair is available and the impulse to let things settle on their own is also present. The choosing of the repair over the settling, repeatedly and in ordinary conditions, is the behavioral evidence of genuine change. Genuine change looks like the honest communication being received as what it is, rather than as pressure to be managed. The specific internal, in-the-moment choice to hear the honest communication as the valuable, legitimate, accurately reporting thing it is, rather than converting it through the defensive architecture into the emotional weight requiring management. This is perhaps the most demanding behavioral change available, because it requires the moment-by-moment interruption of the most automatic and the most deeply grooved of the defensive responses. None of this is available without support. This is worth saying clearly rather than leaving the impression that the avoidant who has lost the right person and allowed the pain to do its full work can produce genuine architectural change through willpower and intention alone. The defensive architecture was not built through willpower and intention. It was built through the accumulated, repeated, formative experience of a developing person in a specific emotional environment. It is encoded at the level of the nervous system. It responds to the approach of genuine intimacy as threat at the level of the body before the conscious mind has engaged, and the changing of it requires work at the same level. The nervous system level, the body level, the specific, sustained, supported work of developing new responses to the old triggers through the repetition required to build new pathways in a system that has been running the old pathways for decades. This is therapeutic work in the genuine sense, not the acquisition of psychological vocabulary. Not the intellectual understanding of attachment theory, the specific, uncomfortable, regularly humbling, often nonlinear work of actually changing how the nervous system responds to the specific conditions that have always activated the defensive patterns. The avoidant who is genuinely willing to do this work after losing the right person is making the most important available choice. Not because it guarantees the return of the right person has their own life and their own healing and their own timeline that does not depend on the avoidant's readiness. But because it is the only available response to the honest recognition of what the pattern has cost, that does not simply perpetuate the cost with the next right person. For you, the person reading this who is the right person who was lost, something needs to be said directly. The avoidance pain is real. The recognition that you were the right person, arriving in the specific, management-resistant, daily experience form of genuine grief, is real. The possibility that the pain produces genuine change is real. None of this is yours to wait for. None of this requires your availability to the process. None of this represents an obligation to be present for the reckoning or accessible for the changed version if it eventually arrives. Your life is already happening, is already moving in the genuine, forward-facing, completely yours direction that your own honest choices have been building. The avoidance pain is their experience. Their reckoning is their work. Their change, if it comes, is their achievement. None of it is yours to facilitate or monitor or hold yourself available for. What is yours is the clear, honest, permanently available knowledge of what you brought to the connection, the specific, genuine, extraordinary quality of your presence and your seeing and your patient, sustained, finally self-respecting investment in something real. That knowledge is not contingent on the avoidance recognition of it, is not waiting for their pain to confirm it, was always true and remains always true regardless of what their interior is currently processing. You were the right person. The pain their loss of you produced is the honest measure of that. You deserve to be met properly while you were there. You are not. And the life you are building in the aftermath of choosing yourself is the most honest available response to both of those truths simultaneously. The avoidance pain is the echo of your presence. Your life is the presence itself. Build it fully. It was always the more important thing. The building is already underway. That is the honest truth of where you are, and it deserves to be said plainly rather than as the conclusion of a long arc of elevated language. The life you are building is not a metaphor. It is the specific, daily, ordinary reality of someone who made a genuine choice and is living the consequences of that choice in the most literal sense. Waking up in a life that belongs more fully to you than the one you inhabited during the dynamic. Making decisions from genuine preference rather than from the calibration of what the dynamic could support. Bringing your attention to things that return the investment rather than absorbing it without adequate reciprocation. This is not dramatic. It is not the cinematic version of moving on that the narrative of self-reclamation sometimes promises. It is quieter than that, and more durable than that, and more genuinely worth having than that. The ordinary days that belong to you are the building, not the peak moments, not the charged everything-at-stake interactions that the avoidant dynamics specialized in producing. The ordinary days, the Tuesday that begins with your own thoughts, the afternoon that moves through its own genuine content, the evening that has its own texture rather than the texture of wherever the dynamic's current configuration happens to be. Something worth addressing honestly is the specific experience of knowing that the avoidant is in pain, of having the understanding, available through everything this conversation has described, that the loss of you produced something real and significant in someone who genuinely felt something real and significant for you. This knowledge is complicated to hold. Not because it should produce guilt, it should not, and the pain is the natural consequence of patterns that were consequential rather than the product of anything you did wrong. But because genuine caring does not simply switch off when a relationship ends. Because love, when it was real, does not dissolve cleanly into indifference. Because the person you cared about is a person, and persons in pain are persons you care about, and the knowledge of their pain produces something in you that is real and human and worth acknowledging rather than pretending away. You are allowed to hold the knowledge of their pain with genuine compassion. You are allowed to feel something about the fact that losing you produced something significant in them. You are allowed to care about that without the caring requiring action, without the compassion becoming the reason to make yourself available to the pain's resolution, without the genuine human response to another person's genuine suffering being converted into the obligation to address the suffering at your own expense. Compassion and self-protection are not opposites. You can genuinely care about what they are experiencing and genuinely not be the right person to address it. Both things simultaneously. The compassion is real. The boundary is also real. Neither cancels the other. The avoidance pain after losing the right person will move through its own arc, on its own timeline, completely independently of what you do with your life. This is worth stating as a practical, grounded, de-escalated fact, rather than as the conclusion of an elevated argument. Their pain will have its acute phase and its sustained phase. It will produce the reckoning, or it will not. It will be used as the motivation for genuine change, or it will be managed back to a comfortable level. It will eventually settle into whatever form it takes as part of their ongoing relational history. All of that will happen in their interior, on their timeline, shaped by their choices and their willingness and the specific internal and external resources they bring to the processing of it. Your life proceeds on its own timeline, shaped by your choices and your direction and the specific daily concrete decisions you make about where your attention goes and what you invest in and what you build. These two timelines are parallel. They are not converging on a required intersection point. They may intersect again, or they may not. Whether they intersect and under what conditions and what the intersection would require and whether those requirements are met, all of that is genuinely uncertain and genuinely not the primary concern of either timeline right now. The primary concern of your timeline is your life, specifically and concretely and without the abstraction that elevated language can introduce. Your actual life, the projects that matter to you, the relationships that nourish you, the daily habits and practices and investments of attention that are building something genuine, the specific, personal, entirely yours version of a life that is more fully inhabited now than it was during the dynamic. One final thing deserves saying about the pain avoidance show after losing the right person, and it is the thing that is perhaps most honestly useful for where you actually are. The pain is real and it is the honest measure of what you were worth to them. But you were worth that much the entire time, not just now, in the pain of the loss, throughout, during every withdrawal that you absorbed, during every honest communication that was managed rather than received, during every ordinary Tuesday when you showed up fully and the showing up was taken for granted rather than honored. The worth was always there. The pain is simply the form in which it finally became undeniable to the person who was not adequately acknowledging it, while the acknowledgement was available and could have changed something. You do not need the pain to confirm the worth. The worth was never contingent on their recognition of it. It existed in every moment of the dynamic, visible in the quality of what you brought, in the patience you extended, in the honesty you maintained, in the self-respect you finally demonstrated by choosing yourself when the dynamic had run past what it was reasonable to sustain. The pain is their experience of the worth they did not adequately honor. Your experience of the worth is different and simpler and more directly available. It is the experience of someone who knows, from the inside, what they brought and what they gave and what the giving cost and what it was worth. That knowledge is permanent, is not dependent on the avoidance pain to sustain it. Was always true, will remain true regardless of what their interior processes in the aftermath of losing you. You were worth more than the dynamic returned. You always were. The pain on their side is just the honest accounting finally catching up to what was always true.